Hi guys. This week we're looking at World War II. Specifically, we're going to be focused on the war in Europe. So we're going to first take a look at some long-term causes of World War II. So like what are those things that are sort of there building up to the war? And then what are some of the short-term causes? And then looking at the immediate cause. So some of the long-term causes of World War II. One would be the failure of the Treaty of Versailles. So when we were on World War One, I had mentioned that we could really, in essence, say that the Treaty of Versailles and basically um, the consequence, the effect it had on Germany, really sort of set the seed for the Second World War to occur. So you have a very bitter country, very resentful, and now you have a leader like Hitler coming in that basically says, I don't care what the treaty says, I'm going to do what I want to do. So the Treaty of Versailles really was a failure. There was the worldwide economic depression. So after World War One, this depression sets in. The economy all over the world was bad. Unemployment rates were anywhere from 25 to 35% in different European nations as well as in the US. And then the rise of the dictator, so having the totalitarian states also helped kind of building up to this World War II. Some of the short term causes of World War II, one is expansionism. So, all of these dictators wanted to basically use military aggression and as a way to get more land and more resources. The failure of appeasement. So, appeasement is when you try to give somebody a little something, right? So you're trying to appease them in an effort for them to kind of halt with what they're doing. So hoping that if I give you a little bit, then that'll kind of make you happy and you won't go any further. What we're going to see with Hitler, especially, as well as Italy, but more so with Hitler, the Allied nations, France and Great Britain, were trying to appease him over and over again to no avail. So this would be one of those short-term causes. And then the immediate cause is when Germany invades Poland. Right. The Axis powers. So when we're talking about the Axis powers, we're looking at Germany. Initially, we're looking at Germany, Italy, and Japan. And then some other countries do join in, such as Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. So some aggression in at least two of these countries, looking at Germany and Italy, pre-World War II, so before World War II actually begins. So we see a lot of aggression taking place with Hitler. The first thing that he does is he starts to rebuild his military. He creates a new air force. He then moves his troops into the Rhineland. If you recall, the Rhineland is a small area of land, kind of a region along the Germany and the France border. This was supposed to be demilitarized, so they were not supposed to have any sort of military forces located there. He said, you know what, too bad, so sad, I'm moving them in. Shortly after that, he then moves troops into Austria. Austria was important to Hitler because it was his native country, it was his home country. So he wanted to take back that country and unite it with Germany. We call this the Anschluss. So Anschluss just means union. So he just wanted to bring Austria back into union with Germany. And then from there, he goes in and he wants Sudetenland. If you recall this one, this was a part of Czechoslovakia that was given back to Czechoslovakia. So Germany did not have this land. However, this part of this region of land was home to mostly German people. So he wanted that land back. Along the way, as he's doing all these small little things that he's not supposed to be doing, basically France and Britain just kind of let it go each time. Again, they were trying to appease him. You know, if we give him a little bit, he'll be okay. Italy is also using some aggressive tactics. Mussolini invades Ethiopia, which is in Africa. His reason for invading Ethiopia was basically to avenge Italy's defeat. So back in the unit of imperialism, remember there was the scramble for Africa. All the European nations were all wanting to get a piece of it. Italy was the one country that was defeated, so they were not able to do that. And again, just as Britain and France kind of overlooked what Hitler was doing, they really did the same thing with Italy as a way of appeasing Mussolini in hopes that he would stop where he was. You can also see on the slide I have down at the bottom the Rome-Berlin axis. Initially, Mussolini didn't like Hitler. Like, he condemned Hitler for building his military back up and all that sort of thing, you know, all that bad things that he was doing. But because Mussolini was invading Ethiopia, Hitler basically stepped in and supported Italy. So Hitler and Mussolini formed an alliance, and that alliance was referred to as the Rome-Berlin Axis. Hitler, at the same time, during the same time period, was fearful of the Soviet Union forming an alliance with the Allies. So he decided to step in and form an alliance with the Soviet Union. We call this the Nazi-Soviet Pact. More often we just call it the Non-Aggression Pact. So basically what this did is basically both countries promising not to attack one another. So, hey, you know, if we go to war, you won't attack me and I won't attack you. The pact lasted till June of 41. The reason that it didn't go any further is because Germany stabbed the Soviet Union in the back and invaded them. All right, so now we have the beginning of World War II. World War II, again, as I already mentioned, is when Germany invades Poland. So this is on September 1st, 1939. 2 days after Germany invades Poland, Great Britain and France then declare war on Germany as a way to defend Poland. The type of military strategy that Germany uses during this invasion of Poland was what they called Blitzkrieg, which just means lightning war. So this was the first time that this type of fighting was introduced, was in this invasion. They basically took a hold of the whole country of Poland within a month using this style of warfare. So it's basically just a quick blitz with tanks, and then you have your infantry on foot. Just very effective and very efficient way of fighting. Once Germany goes in and takes hold of Poland, they then turn, they invade Denmark and Norway. And then shortly after that, they go through Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. After Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands is to hit France. So they do invade France. However, France is surprised with the attack. The Allied forces were all set up along the border between Germany and France. And as they were coming back down from the north, they did a surprise attack through the Ardennes forest where they weren't expecting them. Hitler's forces trapped the Allied army, but it did manage to escape through heroic and a huge, massive rescue effort through a small port called Dunkirk. So once they were trapped there on the beaches, there were approximately 300 and a little less than 340,000 troops, but they all did escape and made it back to England. Eventually, Germany takes hold of Paris, so they basically capture Paris, and France is now forced to surrender. So France and Germany sign an armistice in which Germany is then occupying approximately 3/5 of France, so a rather large amount. And Germany then sets up an authoritarian government that rules the rest of the country. The part of the country that was being ruled by this authoritarian government was called Vichy France. So now we have basically Britain just standing alone against Germany. The U.S. policy at the time was isolationism. In fact, there were laws of neutrality that were put forth just to keep us out, right? We don't want to be dragged into a war again. However, President Roosevelt saw some danger in this type of policy and really encouraged aiding Great Britain with food, with ships, planes, weapons, all of those things that they needed to fight against Germany. So something interesting here. So I basically just went over all of this on that last slide. But the man that you see shaking hands with Hitler was actually a Frenchman. His name is Marshal Pétain, and he was basically put in charge of this authoritarian government that Germany had set up. And so he was actually working for the Nazis against his own country. All right, so the next big battle is the Battle of Britain. So Hitler is going to invade Great Britain because they oppose the Nazis. So this battle was a naval air battle. Hitler's first goal was to control the skies. So if I can control the skies, then I can go in and do damage on land. So you basically have the Royal Air Force, which is the British Air Force, against Germany's Air Force, which was the Luftwaffe, is what it was called. During this battle of the summer and fall of 1940, Germany literally bombed the city of London for 2 months straight. Just relentless bombing of the city. A lot of damage done, of course. Thousands of people are killed or injured. Great Britain was able to move, however, millions of women as well as children to the English countryside, as well as to Canada, and some going into the U.S. And so even though there's all this extreme devastation, the morale of the British troops really stayed upbeat. And that really is through the effort of the leadership of Winston Churchill, who basically had extreme, like a motivational, very stirring type speeches. And this really bolstered the spirits of the British. Um, so Great Britain kept fighting back, and they were able to do enough damage to the Luftwaffe that Hitler was forced basically to put his plans sort of on hold. So Germany did have to retreat from the Battle of Britain. And this had been the first time that German forces had actually been defeated. Couple pictures of just what some of that devastation looked like. Again, a big chunk of the whole city of London was destroyed. I mean, you can see here the infrastructure of the road system going basically into the earth. All right, so now we have Germany going after Russia. So, since Hitler believed that Great Britain had hopes of gaining Soviet support, and he also believed that the Soviets could easily be defeated, that's when he decided to break the non-aggression pact and invade the Soviet Union. In the beginning, he did have to delay the fighting initially, and then on June 22nd, 1941, is when the attack really began. So he, once they did their first attack, they were able to sweep through the country pretty quickly. So they made their way from Germany. By November, they had hit the city of Leningrad, which was just outside of Moscow. Operation Barbarossa was basically the name that they gave for this operation. And basically, what he intended to do was to basically destroy the Soviet Union before winter would set in. So, knowing that the winters were very harsh in this part of the world, the idea was just to go and destroy them before winter sets in. By November, the Soviet Union had suffered severe losses, both in the number of troops that were killed. So out of their 4.5 million troops, about 2.5 million perished during this time. They had 700 out of about 15,000 tanks remaining. So severe losses to the Soviet Union. But when they got to Leningrad, this siege, this battle there, it lasted about 900 days. But this basically is the point in which the German advance was halted. So the Soviets were able to now go on attack, and mostly what allowed this to happen is the winter beginning. So harsh winter, Soviets were able to deal with the environmental conditions, so they were able to put Germany on the defensive and them on the offensive. So just a few pictures here. So the Red Army, that's the upper left picture. These are prisoners of war being marched to prison camps. The bottom right. So Russia, if you recall from earlier units, where they would basically burn down their fields, they would burn down their houses, their barns. We call that scorched earth tactic. So you see that they did that same thing in this war. And you can see the beginnings of the winter. This is November of 41. And you can see how extreme the conditions are. And again, the Soviets were able to handle these sort of conditions. All right, then we have the tide turning. So they're able, and the Soviet Union was able to go on the attack against Germany at the siege of Leningrad. But another big setback for Germany happened in North Africa, and this was in the summer of 42. It was here that British forces were able to stop the German general Erwin Rommel in Egypt. In 1942, the Allied powers basically drove all the rest of the Germans and Italians entirely out of North Africa. So by that time, they were all driven out. Oh, and I'm sorry, I have up here 42. That should be 1943, Germans and Italians entirely out. So I will make the change to this when I'm finished with the recording. From there, the Allies quickly went and invaded Sicily. And then from Sicily, they hit the mainland of Italy, marched to Rome, and basically captured Rome June 4th of 1944. The other kind of defeat for the Germans was the Battle of Stalingrad. So this is what really turned the tide in the Soviet Union. So Stalingrad is a city in the Soviet Union. Hitler insisted on staying there, fighting a very bloody battle. He was campaigning to take over the city of Stalingrad. However, Germans were forced to retreat and led to German defeat. So they were basically pushed and driven out. All right, last years of the war in Europe. So during the years of 1942 to 1943, the Allies began to take back Africa as well as Eastern Europe. Italy finally surrenders in September of 1943. And now the Allies prepare for the invasion of France. Here you can see some Allied soldiers holding a Nazi flag. This was during the March to Rome. So as they were marching up to take control back of Italy, this is a little side picture. Operation Overlord. This is what is known as D-Day, June 6, 1944. This is one of the largest battles of the European war and during the World War II. A lot of the movies that maybe you've seen, Hollywood movies and so forth, a lot of them focus on D-Day. So this is when the Allied forces stormed Normandy along the beach area. So this invasion was commanded by U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who later becomes a U.S. president. So under his command, you have troops from the U.S., Canada, and Britain, and we're looking at about 150,000 to maybe 160,000 troops that come aboard. Approximately 5,000 plus ships. So this is the largest naval invasion in history. Approximately 9,000 were killed or wounded during this invasion, just coming straight from the ships going onto the beach area. However, they were able to push through, work their way inland, and then by August of 44, Paris becomes free, so they liberate Paris, and then the Allies continue to drive Germans out of France. So this map here is just kind of showing you the routes that they took. So if you look up coming from where it has the United Kingdom, you see those kind of dark pinkish, peachy looking lines. That shows just the different routes that they came, and then the different areas that they hit along the beaches in Normandy. I will be also putting kind of an animated sort of slide presentation also in Edsby. So please take a look at it. It's really interesting. So you can actually see kind of how all the fighting during the European part of the war takes place, and like how Germany starts to spread their control and then how it starts to go back away. All right, and this is just some parishioners greeting their Allied liberators who freed them. The other battle of the European War, that one of the most important battles of this time, was the Battle of the Bulge. So the Battle of the Bulge was a German retreat that was interrupted by a counteroffensive. So basically you have Germany and the Allied powers just kind of face to face. This starts in December of 44. Heavy losses on both sides. People basically laid kind of in the trenches, not like the trench warfare that we had in World War I, but just trenches in which they just stood line, firing upon one another. It would not be unusual for people just to kind of stay buried under dead people all during the day, and then try to go look for food and so forth at night. So extreme heavy losses on both sides. But by January of 45, the Germans fail. The Allies are able to resume attack. When they go back to attack, they cross the Rhine River, and then they end up at the Elbe River, where they basically meet up with the westward marching Soviets, who had driven the Germans out of the Soviet Union across Poland and back into Germany. So you have both lines that are coming and marching towards Berlin. So you have the Allied soldiers coming from France, marching forward into Germany, and then you have the Soviet Union coming from Soviet Union through Poland, heading towards Berlin through Germany. As they are starting now to close up on the capital, so the capital of Germany is Berlin, the Allies come across concentration camps. They come across death camps. So those people that are remaining in them are liberated, so they're able to free them. The Nazis did destroy some evidence of what had taken place there. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess I should say, what remained of any sort of evidence was enough to kind of tell the story of what had been going on there. As Hitler realizes that Germany's done, he commits suicide. So April 30th is when Hitler commits suicide. And then on May 7th, 1945, Germany surrenders. The Allies accept their surrender. And this day is known as VE Day. And what the VE stands for is Victory Europe. Next week, when we cover the war in the Pacific, you will see the word VJ Day, and that's Victory Japan. And this officially is what ends the war in Europe. So Germany surrendering on May 7th, 1945.